Congratulatory messages for Marcos Jr. continue to pour in. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison hopes to continue a long-standing relationship with the Philippines. The leaders of the biggest economies, the United States and China, earlier pledged stronger ties with Manila. That will be a what will a Marcos administration look like through the eyes of the world? Joining us now is International Studies Professor Renato de Castro. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. The two world powers want the attention of the new administration. Let's start off with the United States. How will Marcos Jr. handle the American alliance?
Well, he already emphasized, even during the campaign, that this is a special relation and we cannot afford to be cavalier. We cannot simply ignore this relationship with the United States, which I think is a very subtle criticism of this current administration, who simply ignored the United States. And of course, shown by the fact that he's one of the two leaders who did not attend the ASEAN-US summit in Washington, D.C. So it's already
Professor,
sending a signal.
And Professor,
I want to basically, yes.
And of course, Professor, this administration, the Duterte administration, has called for review of the 70-year-old mutual defense treaty with the U.S. Do you think the Marcos Jr. administration will call for one as well?
Can you repeat the question, please?
The mutual defense treaty with the United States, Delfin Lorenzana has said it has to be reviewed. Do you think the Marcos Jr. administration will ask for a review itself?
Probably yes. Basically, based on his statement, he understood the nuance of the mutual defense treaty. He's very much aware of it. Whether he would push for a review, of course, is another matter. I'm just basing it in his comment regarding, the significance of the mutual defense treaty in the light of the West Philippine Sea dispute.
Marcos Jr. also has a close relationship with the Chinese, Professor. Could he lean as well towards China like President Duterte?
I don't think so. He might try to send the message that he's close to China, but you have to understand what will be his inspiration in terms of his foreign policy. We should not ignore the influence of his late father. For his late father, the United States is the most important country. If you remember the Marcos administration, so he spent so many years in the United States. I don't think he spent more than a week in China. So again, this might also be a different path that he would take from this current administration. Yeah, in terms of rhetoric, he said the importance of China, but whether he would really push for a closer relation with China at the expense of our alliance with the United States remains to be seen.
How do you think will he handle the Court of Arbitration ruling, which was in Manila's favor on Beijing's expansive claims of the West Philippine Sea?
Well, during the campaign period, he said, why did we sue China? He was very critical, but he has to take into account that on July 12, 2020, Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin basically stated the Philippines acknowledge the ruling. And of course, this has been mentioned by President Duterte during the United Nations General Assembly meeting, in a virtual realm. He announced this. So he will simply have no choice but to follow basically what this administration has done, of course, in a latter period of this administration, to acknowledge the ruling.
And many people right now are watching and waiting on who will be his cabinet secretaries. Among his current crop of advisors, Professor, who is likely to become his defense and foreign affairs secretaries?
I simply have no idea. I'm sorry, I'm not privy to the what's happening within the incoming president's shadow cabinet.
Do you think he will get a general from the AFP to run the defense portfolio?
Probably an officer, from what I heard. A ranking officer, but not necessarily a general.
But do you think that Delfin Lorenzana and Teodoro Teddy Boy Locsin could likely be reappointed if he cannot find anyone new for these two portfolios?
I think he already found somebody also in terms of foreign affairs. But I might mention something, and somebody else will be get appointed. I don't want to be that presumptuous.
But of course, there
So
is a
just
short
based
list.
on
Who do you
what I've
think
been
is in the
hearing.
short list? Who do you think is in the short list, Professor?
I don't know. I heard a former foreign secretary, acting foreign secretary, who is, of course, also from the Ilocos province. That's what I heard. And also what I heard and what came out on was supposed to be a fake news. The list mentioned my former professor in the University of the Philippines. But of course, this has already been denied by this, the current spokesperson. That's the fake news.
Okay, a lot of speculation on who would be filling up these two crucial positions in his cabinet.
But I bet he has already some people in mind. Except that, I'm not in a position to say who they are.
That's right. Fair enough. Bongbong Marcos, of course, has spoken with U.S. President Joe Biden, and he has invited the American chief executive to his inauguration on June the 30th. What will a no-show by Biden mean if he doesn't attend his inauguration, even though he was invited personally?
Well, it's the act of the current president, who already made the promise during the early part of his term that he will never visit the United States. So I think this is already expected. Plus, of course, it was also mentioned by the current president that he sent a high-level delegation to Washington, D.C., made up of course, the executive secretary and the secretary of the Department of National Defense, who probably explained to President Joe Biden why President Duterte could not go to Washington, D.C. at this time of the year. So I think, it's not a deliberate. There's already efforts on the part of the current president to explain his reason, practical reason. Plus, of course, what is not mentioned is the fact that he made a promise, a commitment in 2016 that he will never visit the United States.
Professor Renato de Castro, thank you so much for your insights on
Thank you.
what could become the foreign policy of the new administration. Great to have you with us on The Final Word.